Environmental impacts of logging. From shipping crates to paper bags, the logging industry supplies the raw materials for an array of products. However, this is not without untold harm to the environment. The damage includes habitat loss, pollution, and climate change, with the effects spanning the globe from the rainforests of Central Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America to the northern forests of Canada and Scandinavia. The effects of logging extend beyond just the felling of a swath of trees. Nutrients, water, and shelter for plants, animals, and microorganisms throughout the ecosystem are also lost. Many life forms, both terrestrial and aquatic, are becoming endangered as forests vanish. Trees protect the soil beneath them, thus, tree loss can affect its integrity. For example, the rainforest floor, home to myriad plant life as well as insects, worms, reptiles, amphibians, and small mammals, relies on a dense canopy of branches and leaves to keep it healthy and intact. The canopy prevents surface runoff by intercepting heavy rainfall so that water can drip down onto the porous earth. Tree roots also stabilize the soil and help prevent erosion. In return, a healthy soil encourages root development and microbial activity, which contribute to tree growth and well-being. A major factor in logging-related soil damage comes from road building, with trucks and other heavy equipment compressing the spongy soil, creating furrows where water collects, and disrupting the underground water flow. Eventually, the topsoil wears away, leaving behind an infertile layer of rocks and clay. Logging can also damage aquatic habitats. Vegetation along rivers and stream banks helps maintain a steady water flow by blocking the entry of soil and other residue, while tree shade inhibits the growth of algae. Removing trees obliterates these benefits. When eroding soil flows into waterways, the organic matter within it consumes more oxygen, which can lead to oxygen depletion in the water, killing fish and other wildlife. Trees provide a natural defense against air pollution. They remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere while they emit oxygen, and their leaves filter pollutants from the air. Cutting down trees keeps pollutants airborne, where they can mix with water vapor and form acid rain. Water quality in nearby streams and rivers also deteriorates as tree loss contributes to increased sedimentation. In a healthy forest ecosystem, trees draw moisture from the soil and release it into the atmosphere while they provide shade to lessen evaporation. Thus, deforestation affects rainfall patterns, leading to flooding as well as drought and forest fires. Deforestation is responsible for about 1/5 of carbon dioxide emissions worldwide, making it a major contributor to climate change, in particular, global warming. In the Amazon basin alone, deforestation is responsible for millions of tons of carbon being released into the atmosphere annually. Some logging companies bomb large tracts of forest just to facilitate access to one area, a practice that discharges even more carbon dioxide. Forests, especially the tropical rainforests, are a vital natural resource with extensive biodiversity and irreplaceable wildlife habitats. More responsible logging practices would help ensure that they are protected for future generations. Bird migration. Migration is the regular movement of animals between their breeding grounds and the areas that they inhabit during the rest of the year. Many types of animals migrate, but bird migration in particular has fascinated observers for centuries. Migration is an excellent example of how nature has responded to the biological imperative for species to evolve and spread out into all possible ecological niches that can provide the conditions. necessary for species to breed and raise young. The most common form of bird migration involves traveling to higher latitudes to breed during the warm season and then returning to lower latitudes during the non-breeding period. This form of migration allows birds to breed in areas that provide optimal conditions for nesting and feeding their young. Because of the way in which the continents are placed upon Earth, migration of this type takes place primarily into the higher latitudes of the northern hemisphere. No land birds are known to migrate into the higher latitudes of the southern hemisphere. Only species of seabirds migrate to the southern hemisphere to breed. Although most bird migration takes place between the lower and higher latitudes of the northern hemisphere, many species are transequatorial, living in the northern hemisphere during the breeding season and in the southern hemisphere during the rest of the year. A well-known example of transequatorial migration is the Arctic tern. This tern, which breeds in the Arctic regions and winters in Antarctic waters, travels 24,000 miles a year during migration. Not all migration is long distance. Some species exhibit altitudinal migration. Their breeding areas are in higher elevations, near or at the peaks of mountains, while they spend the non-breeding season in neighboring valleys or other nearby low country. This variety of migration is typical of many grouse species, including the ptarmigan, a form of Arctic grouse. Many rock ptarmigan never leave the high Arctic tundra, spending their breeding season atop windswept Arctic peaks and the winter season in nearby valleys, enduring some of the coldest conditions on Earth. During migration, most birds fly for a limited period each day, probably about 6 to 8 hours, typically flying distances of several hundred miles. Some birds, however, undertake much longer flights when their routes include crossing large bodies of water or other geographic features such as deserts and mountains. For example, many species regularly cross the Gulf of Mexico, a trip that requires a continuous flight of over 1,000 miles and takes from 24 to 36 hours or longer. An extreme example of nonstop bird migration is done by the bar-tailed godwit, which makes a continuous flight of over 11,000 miles from Alaska to New Zealand each year. At the start of its trip, about 55% of its body weight is made up of the fat necessary to fuel this amazing journey. How birds manage to unerringly travel between distant locations is one aspect that has fascinated observers for centuries. Modern-day researchers have attempted to understand this feat. Most studies have found that migratory birds all have some ability to navigate and an innate drive to travel in a particular direction. Nocturnal migrants, those species that travel at night, seem to take their navigational cues from the stars. When the stars are obscured by clouds, nocturnal migrants become confused and may return to Earth or stray off course. Diurnal migrants, those migrating during the day, take their cues from the location of the sun. In addition, diurnal migrants have also been shown to use geographic features such as mountain ranges or sea coasts as other cues for navigation. Because the stars and the sun move constantly over the course of 24 hours, this suggests that migrating birds also have a sense of time. Plant life in the Taklimakan Desert. The Taklimakan Desert, second in size only to Africa's Sahara Desert, occupies some 337,600 square kilometers of northwestern China, an area about the size of Finland. Sparse rainfall, daily temperature swings of up to 20 degrees Celsius, and violent sandstorms make it one of the most extreme environments on Earth. 85% of the Taklimakan Desert consists of shifting sand dunes, some up to 250 meters tall, that are largely free of vegetation. Yet, Transitional areas between the open desert and oases on the desert fringe support diverse plant forms that not only have adapted to the harsh conditions but actually thrive there. Successful desert plants are resilient to scorching summers and frigid winters, drought, and high salt conditions. The plant's principal defense against these environmental stressors consists of drawing in as much water as possible while minimizing moisture loss. 3 Taklimakan plants, Populus euphratica, Tamarix ramosissima, and Alhaji sparsifolia represent some of the most diverse, prolific vegetation in the area. Although they share many survival strategies, each has developed unique coping mechanisms of its own. The Euphrates poplar, Populus euphratica, the only tall tree in the Taklimakan ecosystem, has an extensive root system that allows it to absorb water far from the standing tree. P. euphratica controls evaporation by opening and closing the stomata, or tiny pores, on the leaf surface in response to the amount of moisture being lost through the leaves to the surrounding air. These stomata generally remain open during the day while the plant conducts photosynthesis. P. euphratica can endure high salt concentrations in the soil. It takes in unlimited amounts of salt through the roots, up the stem, and into leaves, where it dilutes the normally toxic salt by increasing the number and volume of its cells. Tamarix ramosissima, a small tree with needle-like leaves commonly known as tamarisk or salt cedar, takes in enormous amounts of water via a far-reaching root system many times the size of the plant above ground. Like P. euphratica, tamarisk can naturally determine when to close stomata to inhibit evaporation and regulate photosynthesis. Tamarisk has a high tolerance for salty conditions and even produces its own salt, which it accumulates in special glands between the leaves and then releases onto leaf surfaces. Leaves dropping to the ground make the soil more saline, or salty, giving tamarisk a competitive advantage over less salt-tolerant plants. Alhaji sparsifolia, a spiny shrub, thrives in the Taklimakan desert even though it uses large amounts of water, especially during the summer months. With only a few wispy roots in the upper soil, it is unaffected by occasional flooding. Most of its roots reach down deep, where they take up water from as far as 16 meters below ground. Unlike P. euphratica and T. ramosissima, which open and close stomata according to conditions on the leaf surface, A. sparsifolia does so according to hydraulic conductance, that is, the ease with which it takes up groundwater. Although desert plants have adapted for their own survival, they also help protect their ecosystem by stabilizing sand dunes, preventing erosion, presenting a barrier to sandstorms, and conserving biodiversity. Peripheral vision in sports. Focus in on something as small as a pin. Notice that as you focus, everything else that fills your whole area of sight is indistinct, just a blur without any clear detail. We unconsciously realize that things fill this peripheral area, but we are not aware of what they are, nor do we care. We simply tolerate the blur. However, sometimes it is important to pay attention to the blur that surrounds the point where we have focused our vision. Athletes, for example, must be keenly aware of what is happening all around them. They demonstrate, with a very high level of skill, how much we can use our entire range of peripheral vision. An athlete's performance depends on training visual abilities, not just muscles. Detecting and keeping track of as much motion as possible while performing physical maneuvers is quite a feat. Peripheral visual information is processed quickly. The office worker might notice the distracting bug moving beside the computer, but the fast-moving athlete must detect all kinds of motion from every angle and never lose concentration. Each peripherally viewed movement must be immediately processed as more and more movements keep coming, rapidly. Good footwork and body positioning will help the athlete gain viewing time in this intense environment, improving the opportunity to anticipate what will happen next. The athlete's view, full of movement, requires rapid scanning with visual focus changing rapidly among various distances. Tracking fast objects is often complicated by the need for the athlete's body to move in response to other aspects of the activity, while head motion must coordinate with eye movement to assist in balance. A volleyball player, for example, must pay attention to body positioning in relation to the speed and angle of the moving ball as well as to the court boundaries, all the while scanning the movement of the other players. Athletes need as much peripheral range as possible. The environment contributes to athletes' visual sharpness. Contrasting court backgrounds, adequate lighting, non-confusing uniform color combinations, and less off-court motion all help the athlete's peripheral concentration. It seems odd that visiting baseball teams are allowed to dress in gray uniforms when bright colors would help the home team keep a better eye on them. Everything that catches the athlete's attention causes the eyes to pause almost indiscernibly as they gather a quick view of focused detail. As the eyes move in and out of focus, there is a blur between each pause. This is when visual tracking errors can occur. Even the act of blinking, usually at a rate of 25 blinks per minute, or 1/10 of a second per blink, interferes with the athlete's vision. Normal, natural blinking means the eyes are closed for 2.5 seconds out of every minute, and more than that if the athlete is anxious. This is added to the rapid blurs that occur as the athlete's eyes move in and out of focus on specific objects. These non-visual moments can be somewhat compensated for if the athlete thoroughly tunes into the game. Anticipation, that learned and practiced art, will serve the athlete well in many ways. History of the circus. The circus is one of the oldest forms of entertainment in history. Although the modern circus has been around for a few centuries, related forms of public entertainment have been in existence for millennia. The animal trainers, clowns, and other circus performers who are familiar to us today can trace their roots to the coliseums, stadiums, and racetracks of the ancient world. The ancient Romans were the first to enjoy the circus. Around the 6th century BC, the Circus Maximus was founded in Rome as a venue for public entertainment, mostly chariot races, which were a popular spectator sport. Other events held at the Circus Maximus included gladiator fights and exhibits of exotic animals such as elephants and tigers. These entertainments were less common than chariot races, but still very popular. The original Circus Maximus venue was built entirely of wood. By the height of the Roman Empire, it had gone through several renovations and had become a massive marble stadium that could seat more than 200,000 spectators. Chariot races continued to be held at the Circus Maximus for almost a century after the last remnants of the Roman Empire had vanished. Eventually, the site was permanently retired, and public entertainment was reduced to small bands of traveling performers and animal trainers. It was during the Dark Ages that the circus began to develop into what we know today. The monarchs of Europe had court jesters, whose duty it was to provide amusement for the court. They combined the talents of jugglers, mimes, and clowns. The more common people enjoyed the performances of traveling entertainers, who went from village to village, putting on shows during festivals. These performers made up the medieval circus, which had little in common with the Circus Maximus other than adopting the word circus as its name. Leisure time was extremely rare during the Dark Ages, and people had few opportunities to enjoy circus performances. However, the circus survived to make a return to its former grandeur in the 18th century. England was one of the first nations to embrace the modern circus. During the late 1700s, an Englishman named Philip Astley founded the first modern circus. He was a skilled rider who invented stunt riding on horseback. He performed his stunts in a circus ring, another of his ideas, within an indoor stadium. After his act became popular in London, he was asked by Louis XV to perform in France. He later expanded his act to include clowns, acrobats, and parades of trained animals. The last addition to his act was slapstick humor. He had horseback riders pretend to fall off their horses and then go stumbling after them. Shortly after Astley's death, the circus spread to America. During the early 1800s, the United States took to the circus quickly after learning of its popularity in Europe. Joshua Brown, an American businessman, introduced the circus tent in 1825. The use of portable tents allowed him to take his act all over the country. His traveling circus was a massive success as a business enterprise and was loved by audiences everywhere. Most circuses today are variations of Brown's circus. Uses of leisure time. Although it may seem that people are working more, studies show that we have more leisure time than ever before. Yet researchers are reporting higher levels of both stress and obesity. These reports appear to be a sign that we are not using our leisure time to our best advantage. Health experts agree that the best way to restore body and mind is to spend time in nature pursuing a comfortable level of physical exercise. Spending time in natural surroundings is especially crucial now because, for the first time, a majority of the world's population live in cities. Recent studies show that intellectual function weakens as a result of the energy expended simply sorting out the overwhelming stimuli of city life. Tests demonstrate that people suffer decreases in attention span, memory, and problem-solving ability after taking a short walk on a busy city street or merely seeing pictures of city life. Tests also show that time spent in the city results in a decreased ability to concentrate and to control emotions and impulses. On the other hand, spending time in the country produces the opposite effects. Unfortunately, as society becomes more centered on city life, we have to rejuvenate ourselves in nature deliberately rather than as a matter of course. Yet research shows that we are not spending our leisure time rejuvenating ourselves. Around the world, the most popular way to spend free time is watching television. This, the most passive of pastimes, is how Americans spend more than half their leisure time. Globally, the next most popular is using the internet, also passive, and it ranks as the most favored among the billions in China. The third is shopping, which may be slightly more active but is still as far from nature as possible. Modern shopping malls remove shoppers from everything natural, leaving them to experience the outdoors only between the paved parking lot and the mall doors. Children are most negatively affected by city life. Parents are reluctant to let children play freely in the city, fearing for their health and safety, and nature is something many children in the city may never have a chance to experience. Childhood obesity and depression are reaching epidemic levels. Authorities have begun to acknowledge the problem, and innovative programs that give children an opportunity to spend time in nature are being introduced in countries around the world. Vacations are the most obvious chunk of leisure time. The countries with the most vacation time are Italy, with an average of 42 days a year, and France, with 37. The industrious Americans have the least, 13 days. Yet the country most satisfied with their vacations are not the Italians, but the British. The British usually divide up their vacation time, taking it in pieces throughout the year rather than all at once. Of all nationalities, the British spend the most time vacationing outdoors in their national trust parks, where they engage in a comfortable level of physical activity. The British report the greatest satisfaction with their leisure time. Perhaps the rest of the world would do well to follow their lead. First headlamps. Before electricity, people relied on fire as a source of light. It was a tricky business. Flames cast limited light, are vulnerable to winds and weather, and can lead to disaster. Making fire portable and dependable was so difficult that lights on moving vehicles were hardly ever considered. The early trains traveled only during the day. The tracks were too dangerous during the dark of night, and passengers wanted to see where they were traveling anyway. In the late 1830s, railroad traffic became heavy enough for freight trains to delay passenger trains. To avoid these delays, railroads started running freight trains at night. Horatio Allen's 1831 innovation, the track illuminator, was suddenly in demand. It was a pile of pine knots burning in an iron grate that sat in a box of sand on a platform car. The car was pushed ahead of the locomotive. The illuminator did not cast much light, but it warned of the approaching train and was the best technology available. In 1841, some trains used an oil lamp backed by a curved reflector, an improvement, but oil lamps blew out easily in the wind, including the wind generated by the movement of the train. At about the same time, Schenectady and Troy Railroad trains displayed a whale oil lamp positioned between a reflector and a lens about 12 inches high. It threw light up to 100 feet ahead of the train. Although this was an improvement, the braking distance the trains required was more than the 100 feet of track that were illuminated. In 1849, a calcium lamp was developed that threw light 1,000 feet and lasted 4 hours. However, the only railroad company to use it was Camden and Amboy. Limelights, which were used to light theater stages on both sides of the Atlantic, were considered too intense for trains. Eventually, acetylene, which did not extinguish in the wind, replaced oil and headlamps. In 1851, the first electric headlamp was developed. This headlamp had two major drawbacks. It required its own generator, which did not become portable until the 1890s when steam generators became common. And the delicate parts broke easily as a result of the rough rails over which the trains traveled. Russia ran the first train equipped with a battery-powered electric headlamp. The French first used steam generators to power electric headlamps on trains. In the United States in 1897, George C. Pyle developed an efficient electric headlamp. By 1916, federal law required trains to have electric headlamps. Automobiles, the exciting new mode of transportation at that time, needed headlamps, too. The requirements for car headlamps were more stringent than those for trains. Because roads were even rougher than rails, cars required more rugged parts, and the steam generators had to be smaller than those in trains. Despite these tougher requirements, the Columbia electric car was equipped with electric headlamps in 1898. Electric headlamps made travel at all hours and in almost all weather possible, something we take for granted today. Major subways of Europe. Public transportation is an intrinsic part of every modern city. Many big cities have an underground rail system as their centerpiece. 3 of the biggest and busiest underground rail systems in Europe are in London, Paris, and Moscow. The character of each city imprints its railways. The first of these subways was London's Underground, which opened in 1863. By that time, horses and pedestrians had so clogged the streets of London that city government ruled that no railroads could enter the city except underground. The method used for laying the first underground tracks is called cut and cover, meaning the streets were dug up, the track was laid, a tunnel was built, and then everything was buried. Although the method was disruptive, it worked. Steam engines chugged under London, releasing steam through vents along the city streets. In its initial day of operation, the London Underground carried 30,000 passengers. This cut-and-cover method caused massive disruptions in the city and required the destruction of the structures above the tunnel. A better means of expanding the original underground was needed, and builders did not have to look far to find it. In 1825, a pedestrian tunnel was built under the Thames River. The construction of this tunnel, the first underwater tunnel ever built, was made possible by engineer Mark Brunel. He had devised a way of supporting the tunnel while the workers dug, called the Brunel Shield. Two young engineers improved the Brunel Shield for use in expanding the London Underground. The new Harlow Greathead shield carved a circular tube more than 7 feet in diameter, which is why the London Underground is called the Tube. By then, the tunnels could be deeper than the original ones because electric train engines had become available. These trains did not have to be close to the surface to release steam. The shield could be used to dig deeper tunnels without destroying the surface structures above them. Paris started designing an underground rail service to rival London's. The first part of its system was not opened until the World's Fair and Olympics were held in that city in 1900. The Paris Metro is shorter than London's, but it carries more passengers every day, second in Europe only to Moscow. Whereas London's Underground is known for its engineering, Paris's Metro is known for its beauty. The stations and entrances are examples of Art Nouveau architecture, and they are decorated with mosaics, sculptures, paintings, and innovative doors and walls. The Moscow Metro opened in 1935. It was based on the design of the London Tube, except much of the track is above ground. When Stalin came to power, he used the stations as showcases of Russian art, culture, and engineering. The underground Moscow stations are filled with statuary, painting, and mosaics. Underground railways are not only for transportation. During World War II, all 3 underground systems were utilized as bomb shelters for the populace. The Moscow subway was even used as a military headquarters. Stores and malls have sprung up by stations, something that is especially convenient in cold climates. All 3 systems are continuing to expand, providing service to more riders in more distant locales. This is all part of an effort to decrease greenhouse gases emitted from personal vehicles. The future of self-driving cars. Self-driving cars, also called autonomous or driverless cars, are cars that operate without human control. These cars use lasers, radar, and cameras in connection with computer software to navigate and operate the vehicle. There are several levels of self-driving car. A level 0 car, the lowest level, is the type of car we have long been accustomed to, one that is entirely operated by a human driver. A level 5 car, the highest level, would be a car that operates without any human control at all. Such a car would not even need to include a steering wheel. In between are several levels of automation, some features of which are already common or becoming so. A level 1 car, for example, could have cruise control and automatic braking. A higher level car would have additional features, such as assisted parking. As more automatic features are added, less driver control is required. Advocates of self-driving cars tout their many advantages. At the top of the list is safety. Over 90% of traffic accidents are caused by human error, a problem that self-driving cars eliminate. Unlike human drivers, self-driving cars are not easily distracted, do not fall asleep at the wheel, and do not drive at unsafe speeds. In addition, these cars use sensors and software to observe traffic and weather conditions constantly and to adjust their driving accordingly. Thus, more self-driving cars on the road means fewer collisions. An added advantage is that self-driving cars can lead to lower car insurance and healthcare costs. Self-driving cars are also convenient for commuters. Who wouldn't prefer to spend their morning drive to the office reading, talking on the phone, catching up on work, or even napping rather than steering a car through traffic congestion? Efficiency is another advantage. Self-driving cars use GPS to find the quickest route, can detect delays and accidents, and quickly reroute if necessary. This not only results in quicker trips, but also in a reduction of emissions, much of which is generated by cars sitting in traffic. This is especially important in urban areas, which are well known for traffic congestion. Finally, self-driving cars lead to greater independence for people such as the elderly and disabled who may have difficulty operating a vehicle. Self-driving cars also have their critics. Of course. One possible disadvantage is that the convenience of self-driving cars for individuals could lead to more cars on the road. This, in turn, could lead to increased levels of emissions unless, of course, the cars are electric. Other problems include the high cost of purchasing the cars, the possibility of hackers gaining control of the cars, and the loss of jobs for truck and taxi drivers. Of course, technology also presents its own challenges. Rain and snow can interfere with sensors on the car, blocking the ability to detect nearby activity and objects. Road signs and traffic signals would need to be upgraded to be easily readable by a car's sensors. A fully autonomous car would need to have a human's ability to identify and predict the behavior of different objects in the road. A pedestrian, a deer, and a bicycle, for example, each act in different and often unpredictable ways. Engineers continue working to develop and improve the self-driving abilities of cars. Meanwhile, various uses for these cars are being put to the test. Some see their future not so much for individual transportation as for other uses. Robotaxis, that is, fully automated taxis or ride-sharing services, are one possibility that could actually eliminate the need for individual ownership of cars. Self-driving delivery trucks and self-driving vans and buses for public transportation are other areas where the technology could be applied. However things develop, one thing is clear: in some form or other, self-driving cars are part of the future of transportation. Origins of writing. Ancient civilizations attributed the origins of writing to the gods. For the ancient Egyptians, their god Thoth was the creator of writing and, in some stories, also the creator of speech. The ancient Sumerians and Assyrians also believed that writing originated with certain gods, as did the ancient Maya. In Chinese mythology, the creation of writing is attributed to an ancient sage and was used for communication with the gods. Clearly, writing was highly valued even by ancient peoples. Humans began painting pictures on cave walls 25,000 years ago or more, but writing systems did not develop until groups of people began settling in farming communities. Scholars say that writing systems developed independently in at least 3 different parts of the world: Mesopotamia, China, and Mesoamerica. The oldest known writing system developed among the ancient Sumerians in Mesopotamia around 3000 BC. Along with the rise of agricultural societies came the development of property ownership and the need to keep records of it. In early agricultural societies, property consisted largely of land, livestock such as cattle, and grain. Originally, clay tokens of various shapes were used to count these possessions. From this developed a system of impressing the shapes onto clay tablets. One of the earliest clay tablets of this type was found in excavations in Mesopotamia and dates from the time of the Sumerian culture. Scribes then began using reeds instead of tokens to mark the clay, developing a system of wedge-like shapes to represent the tokens. This system of writing using wedge shapes is known as cuneiform. It was later adopted by other cultures and became the basis for other writing systems. Originating in a system that used pictures to represent objects, cuneiform writing eventually developed into systems that used symbols to represent the sounds of language. The oldest form of Chinese writing dates from around 1500 BC. It is called oracle bone script because it was carved on animal bones and shells that were used for predicting the future. At a later period, Chinese writing appeared on bronze vases and later still developed into a system that was used to record government affairs. The Chinese writing system was also the original basis for both the Japanese and Korean writing systems. In Mesoamerica, a region that encompasses parts of Mexico and Central America, it is the ancient Mayans who are famous for the writing they inscribed on temple walls and other religious structures. However, scholars believe that writing in that part of the world may have begun before the rise of the Mayan civilization. The Zapotec culture, centered on Oaxaca, Mexico, was already using writing around 400 BC, or possibly earlier. The Olmec culture may have developed a writing system even earlier than that. Recent discoveries show that the Mayans may have begun writing around 2,300 years ago. They used a system of symbols that represented words and syllables to record information about the deeds of their rulers as well as information connected to their calendar and astronomy. Their system of writing survived until the time of the Spanish conquest in the 1500s. In ancient times, only specialized people such as scholars, priests, or government officials used writing. Today, close to 3/4 of the world's adult population can read and write, and literacy is considered a basic skill necessary to function in the modern world. Hula dancing in Hawaiian culture. Many people dream of visiting the beautiful Hawaiian Islands. Mention of this Pacific paradise evokes images of women in grass skirts swaying their hips as they perform graceful island dances for the benefit of tourists. Although this image is a common stereotype of Hawaii, it has its roots in a real tradition that continues to play an important role in Hawaiian culture. Hula dancing has always been part of Hawaiian life. Hawaiian mythology includes various stories that explain the origins of hula, each story attributing its creation to a different god or goddess and its first appearance to a different location. In reality, hula dancing is such an ancient tradition that it is impossible to say when or where it first appeared. It was most likely originally performed in front of an altar in honor of gods and accompanied by great ritual. It is a common belief that the ancient hula was danced only by men, but some scholars point to evidence suggesting that hula was traditionally danced by both men and women. The English explorer Captain James Cook's visit to the islands in the 18th century caused many changes to Hawaiian society as a result of the contact with European culture. Although hula did not completely disappear after contact, it was discouraged. King David Kalakaua is credited with reviving hula dancing during his reign in the late 19th century. He was interested in re-establishing lost traditions, and hula was performed at celebrations held in his honor. In the 1960s, a Hawaiian cultural festival was established as part of an effort to attract more tourists to the islands. A major part of this festival consisted of hula competitions, which were organized into categories of hula kahiko, or hula danced in the ancient style, and hula oana, or modern hula. This festival, called the Merry Monarch Festival in honor of King David Kalakaua, has become a major annual cultural event. The hula competition is a central part of the festival and has had a significant influence on modern hula dancing. Hula continues to be danced in both the ancient and modern styles. Traditional hula is an energetic dance performed to the accompaniment of chants and the beating of drums. The dancers wear traditional costumes consisting of garlands of leaves, skirts of tapa, and anklets made of animal bone. Many of the movements of modern hula are based on the ancient hula, but the modern style is slower and more graceful. It is danced to flowing guitar and ukulele music, and the dancers wear elaborate costumes, including the famous Hawaiian floral garlands known as leis. Hula has attracted the interest of people outside the islands, and hula schools can be found in many parts of the world. Although people of other nationalities learn to dance some form of hula, it is also danced by Hawaiians who live away from the islands, on the mainland United States, in Europe, and elsewhere. It has become a way for native Hawaiians to maintain their cultural identity even while living away from their island homeland. What was once a religious ritual has become a form of entertainment, not only for tourists, but also for native Hawaiians who seek to maintain connections with their cultural heritage. The Art of Mime. Miming dates back to the theaters of ancient Greece and Rome. Mimes use movements, gestures, and facial expressions to portray a character or an emotion or to tell a story, all without words. Over the centuries, the art of miming grew to include acrobatics, props, and costumes, culminating in the fine-tuned art form that people recognize today. Miming can be abstract, literal, or a combination of the two. Abstract miming usually has no plot or central character, but simply expresses a feeling such as sorrow or desire. Literal miming, on the other hand, tells a story and is often comedic, using body gestures and facial expressions to present a main character facing some type of conflict in a humorous way. For example, acting out a tug-of-war without the aid of rope or other props. The 20th century style of miming reflects outside influences of the period, most notably silent films, in which actors relied on their ability to communicate thoughts and stories through facial expressions and exaggerated gestures. Two superstars of the silent movie era, Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin, sharpened their miming skills in the theater before using them in movies. Both were so successful that they have continued to influence mimes and other live performers long after their deaths. People still consider Chaplin a master of the miming technique, in particular, his tragicomic Little Tramp character, who so effectively portrays human frailty through physical comedy, also known as slapstick. Another 20th century influence on modern miming involves a renowned French mime and acting teacher named Etienne Decroux, who developed what was known as corporeal mime. This art form focused on the body, showing thought through movement, and became the prominent form of the modern mime era. In the 1930s, Decroux founded a mime school in Paris based on corporeal mime. One of his students, a young Frenchman named Marcel Marceau, emerged as what many consider the master of modern mime. Marceau added his personal touch to the art of miming and presented it to the world for half a century on television and in theaters. Among his well-known illusions are portrayals of a man walking against the wind and a man trapped inside a shrinking box. Marceau also created his own special character, Bip the Clown. White-faced and dressed in a striped shirt and floppy top hat with a red flower, Bip is reminiscent of both Chaplin's Little Tramp and Pierrot, the traditional downtrodden mime character from centuries earlier. Miming is still taught in dance, drama, and acting schools worldwide, although it has changed considerably since the ancient Greek plays and even since the solo performances of Marceau. Group miming is now in fashion, and sounds, lighting, and other special effects are included to help create the desired atmosphere. Current examples include the U.S. dance troupe Pilobolus, which merges modern dance, acrobatics, gymnastics, and mime to create elaborate geometric shapes with their bodies, and the Canadian Cirque du Soleil, which uses lighting, spectacular costumes, and special effects to produce striking illusions. Nurse migration. There are more nurses today than at any time in history, yet a global nursing shortage threatens to cripple healthcare systems worldwide. Because the underlying causes of a shortage are complex and vary in different regions, a simple, short-term fix will not remedy the situation. In developing nations, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Latin America, a major reason for the shortage is nurse migration to developed countries in Europe and North America as well as Australia to help fill vacancies there. Nurse migration is hardly a recent phenomenon. For years, the Philippines has trained many more nurses than the country needs, with thousands working abroad and sending money to relatives back home, nearing $1 billion annually. From that standpoint, migration of nurses from poorer to wealthier countries would appear to benefit all involved. But there is another side to the story. Today, even the Philippines feels the effects of the nursing shortage, with nurses continuing to migrate abroad while positions at home go unfilled. Lured by the higher salaries and better quality of life available in wealthier countries, nurses from developing countries frequently leave behind already overburdened healthcare systems, where nurses are often the primary caregivers because doctors, too, are in short supply. Conditions then deteriorate further as the nurse-to-population ratio declines, a number that is estimated to be 10 times higher in European than in African countries. Some Latin American countries are experiencing such a shortage of nurses that doctors actually outnumber them, leaving the bulk of healthcare up to assistant nurses, who have only rudimentary training. Routine immunizations and prenatal care fall victim to the nursing shortage in developing countries, and in many cases the results can be life-threatening. In African countries where the HIV/AIDS epidemic is rampant, some patients go untreated not because life-saving drugs are unavailable but because there are not enough nurses to administer them. In developed countries in Europe and North America, the nursing shortage largely stems from an aging population who require more healthcare services, coupled with a dwindling supply of nurses, many of whom are likewise nearing retirement age, with fewer young people preparing to replace them. A common thread among nurse-importing countries' underinvestment in nursing education dating back 2 or more decades has prevented them from creating a stable workforce to meet current and future needs. The United Kingdom, for example, still feels the effects of a cutback in nurse training some 20 years ago. In the United States, nursing schools turn down thousands of qualified applicants every year because of their own shortages of nursing faculty. Developed countries need to invest in nursing education and focus on retaining and rewarding nurses appropriately, both financially and through high-quality working conditions. Widespread nurse migration helps neither the host country nor the country of origin in the long run, does nothing to remedy the underlying cause of the shortage, and results in millions of people being deprived of the health care they need. Aerobic exercise and brain health. The disease-fighting, weight-controlling benefits of physical exercise, especially aerobic exercise, have long been known. Now, researchers have discovered another advantage. Physical exercise has a powerful effect on brain health, and the benefits go beyond the release of endorphins, the chemical in the brain that improves mood. Exercise affects the brain's plasticities, that is, its ability to reorganize itself, and can reduce the age-associated loss of brain tissue that decreases cognition in the elderly and in those who have disorders such as Alzheimer's disease. Recent studies have found that exercise activates a number of factors in the brain, including a protein known as brain-derived neurotrophic factor that stimulate the growth and development of brain cells. BDNF regulates the production of synapses, the connections between neurons that are essential for transmitting signals from one nerve cell to the next, and may also be involved in producing new nerve cells. Using rodent models, researchers found increased concentrations of BDNF in the hippocampus, an area of the brain involved in learning and memory and associated with dementia, after only 1 week of regular exercise. A study in older humans found a correlation between aerobic fitness, the size of the hippocampus, and performance on spatial memory tests. Other human studies noted that aerobic exercise increased the volume of gray matter in some parts of the brain. Regular exercise can help stave off some effects of normal aging and delay or diminish the gravity of conditions such as Alzheimer's disease, depression, and multiple sclerosis. Even over a relatively short time, exercise can repair some of the loss in brain capacity associated with aging. The greatest effects have been found in processes such as decision-making. Aerobic exercise can also improve short-term memory in the elderly. Exercise has been found to lower the risk of Alzheimer's disease in mice by decreasing the buildup of a protein known as beta amyloid, which forms the brain plaques that precede Alzheimer's. The mice also outperformed non-exercising mice in a memory test. In a study of multiple sclerosis patients, those who exercised regularly fared better than those who exercised less. The exercise group scored better on tests of cognitive function, and their brain scans showed less deterioration and more gray matter. In addition to increasing brain power, exercise can help relieve depression. Although it is well known that endorphins help relieve stress and reduce anxiety and depression, BDNF plays a role as well. Human studies have shown people who have been diagnosed with major depression typically have lower concentrations of BDNF in their blood. Animal studies indicate that corticosteroids, which the body produces in response to stress, decrease the availability of BDNF in the hippocampus. Exercise can counteract this effect. Exercise also lessens depression by increasing blood flow to the brain. The link between aerobic exercise and improved brain function in the elderly and in people with impaired cognition could lead to new ways to prevent and treat brain disorders. Meanwhile, people may have more control over their own brain health than was previously believed. How drugs are studied. It takes years, and sometimes decades, for a drug to move from the theoretical stage to the pharmacy shelf. Of the thousands of drugs under investigation at any one time, only a small fraction will produce the desired result without unacceptable side effects. First, scientists target a step in the disease process where they believe a drug can have an effect. Then they manufacture compounds or take them from organisms such as viruses and fungi and test them in laboratory cultures. Once scientists isolate a chemical that produces a desired effect, they analyze its structure and alter it as necessary to enhance the outcome. The next step involves testing the drug on animals. Scientists look at how much of the drug is absorbed into the bloodstream, how it spreads to different organs, how quickly it is excreted or leaves the body, and whether it has any toxic byproducts. Researchers usually test at least 2 animal species because the same drug may affect species differently. If a chemical passes laboratory and animal testing and is deemed appropriate to analyze in human volunteers, it is ready for clinical trials. Researchers follow a protocol that describes who may participate in the study, tests and procedures to follow, the length of the study, and outcomes to be measured. Drug trials may focus on treating a disease, preventing a disease from occurring or recurring, or enhancing the quality of life for people living with incurable, chronic conditions. There are 4 phases of clinical trials. The first 3 phases study whether the drug is effective and can be safely administered to patients, and the 4th phase evaluates long-term safety and use once a drug is on the market. Phase 1 clinical trials test a drug in small groups of healthy volunteers to ascertain its safety and the appropriate dose range. These studies last for 6 months to 1 year. Phase 2 clinical trials test several hundred volunteers to determine how effectively the drug combats the disease being studied. These trials continue to evaluate safety, side effects, and optimal dose. Phase 2 studies also last for 6 months to 1 year. Phase 3 trials test thousands of volunteers for several years, with researchers closely monitoring study participants at regular intervals. These studies typically compare the drug under investigation with a control. Either a drug known to cure or alleviate a specific disease, or, if one does not exist, a substance that has no medicinal effects, known as a placebo. Phase 3 trials are typically blind studies. Participants do not know which drug they are receiving, or double-blind studies. Neither participants nor researchers know which drug an individual is receiving until the trial is completed. Once a drug passes the first 3 phases and is found to be safe and effective, drug companies may apply for the right to market the product. After a drug is approved and on the market, Phase 4 trials may investigate longer-term effects in different groups of patients such as the elderly, or use of the medication for a different condition such as using a cancer drug to treat AIDS. Hiking the Inca Trail. Sitting high in the Andes Mountains in Peru, the ancient ruins of Machu Picchu have captured the imaginations of travelers ever since they were rediscovered by archaeologist Hiram Bingham in 1911. The name Machu Picchu means Old Peak in the native Incan language, and the site had probably been considered a sacred place since long before the ancient Incas arrived there. The Incas built a ceremonial city on the site that included palaces, temples, storage rooms, baths, and houses, all constructed from heavy blocks of granite fitted precisely together. Although little is known about the activities that took place in the ancient city, it appears that one of its functions was as an astronomical observatory. The so-called Intihuatana stone, located at the site, was used to mark the autumn and spring equinoxes as well as other astronomical events. The spectacular natural setting, the wonders of architectural and engineering skills embodied in the well-preserved buildings, and the mysteries of the ancient culture draw thousands of tourists from around the world every year. The nearest city is Cusco, about 30 miles away. From there, tourists can take trains and buses to the ruins. A popular route for the more adventurous is to hike along the Inca Trail. The ancient Inca created a network of trails throughout the mountains, some of which are still in existence. The Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, used by hikers today, was likely considered a sacred route in its time, used by travelers making pilgrimages to that ceremonial site. While the Inca Trail leads to the wonders of Machu Picchu, it offers many marvels of its own. Hikers are treated to magnificent views of glacier-covered peaks above and tropical valleys below in their journey over high mountain passes. Many species of orchids can be seen, as well as all kinds of birds, from tiny hummingbirds to the splendid Andean condor. The Inca Trail also passes by ruins of other ceremonial sites on the way to the grand destination of Machu Picchu. Tourists have been hiking the Inca Trail since the early part of the 20th century, and for much of that time there were no regulations. Hikers could travel when they pleased and camp wherever they chose. However, the trip has become so popular that in 2005, the Peruvian government instituted a set of restrictions on the use of the trail. To protect the natural environment and preserve the ruins, no more than 500 people a day are allowed to enter the trail. Because each group that sets out includes guides and porters, the number of tourists entering the trail each day is probably closer to 200. In addition, both tour companies and individual guides must be licensed. There are also legal requirements that pertain to the minimum wage that porters must be paid as well as the maximum weight load they can be required to carry. Fees for trail use help pay for upkeep of the trail and the ruins. All these regulations and fees combine for a more expensive trip, and this has made it a luxury accessible to fewer people. The upside is that the environment and the workers are protected. What is ecotourism? The concept of ecotourism has been gaining publicity over the past couple of decades. It arose out of the green movement, a growing interest in developing practices in all aspects of daily life that preserve rather than injure the natural environment. Ecotourists strive to have minimal impact on the places they visit in terms of both the local ecology and the local culture. Some followers take the concept even further and define ecotourism as travel that aims not only to avoid harming the environment, but also to make a positive contribution to the local ecology and culture. The types of vacations that fit into the category of ecotourism vary widely. Ecotourism might involve travel to a natural destination such as a national park or a nature preserve to learn about the natural environment and, in some cases, to volunteer on environmental protection projects. It could be a few weeks spent with local artisans learning how to do a traditional craft. Trips that involve hiking or rafting through wilderness areas with no regard for the natural habitats one passes through would not be included in the definition of ecotourism. Neither, of course, would be trips with a focus on hunting. Ecotourists seek out accommodations that follow environmentally friendly practices such as using renewable resources and recycling. Ecotourists look for hotels and tour companies that hire mainly local staff, keeping tourist dollars within the local economy. Ecotourists might choose to join a bicycling or walking tour rather than a bus tour that adds to air pollution and allows tourists to see the local area only through a barrier of glass windows. Ecotourists usually avoid cruise ships because these are among the biggest culprits in the tourism industry in terms of environmental pollution. Massive cruise ships release large quantities of harmful emissions into the air as well as pollute the waters they sail through with fuel from their engines. The huge numbers of passengers on these ships generate many tons of garbage and wastewater, which is often dumped into the sea. Cruise ships also cause damage to coral reefs and other delicate ecosystems that they travel near. Perhaps in part because of the growing interest in ecotourism, some cruise companies are now making an effort to be more environmentally friendly. These efforts include recycling wastes and using fuel more efficiently. Vacationers who are interested in ecotourism and still get pleasure from cruises can travel with cruise companies that follow these practices. Because of the growing interest in ecotourism, many companies advertise themselves as ecotourism companies, especially those that offer trips to remote, natural areas, the type of destination that ecotourists favor. Travelers need to be wary and do their research carefully. Not all of these companies follow the principles of ecotourism. Some are simply trying to take advantage of the current interest in this type of travel. The positive side of this, however, is that it may actually be an indication that the movement is gaining in popularity. Learning vacations. A couple spends a week in Thailand learning to cook in the local style. A group flies to Turkey to join an ongoing archaeological dig for the summer. A history professor leads a tour of historical sites of Europe. The participants in these trips are all enjoying a different kind of travel, learning vacations. Rather than spending their vacations relaxing on a beach or taking a bus tour of 10 cities in 8 days, they have opted to enjoy their time off by learning something new. From attending summer camps for adults to studying botany in the rainforest, people everywhere are experiencing the value of a vacation with a purpose. According to surveys, close to 1/3 of travelers each year choose learning programs over other types of vacations, and their numbers are growing. In the past, these types of vacations were generally considered to be for young people still in school. A student of French might spend the summer studying that language in Paris. A marine biology major could learn to scuba dive and spend a few months at sea assisting researchers. Now, it has become common for adults, too, to spend their vacation time in educational endeavors, and various types of travel programs have grown up around this interest. Art schools and writing programs sponsor trips to interesting parts of the world. Trip participants hone their creative skills under the supervision of professional artists and writers while at the same time enjoying, for example, the warm breezes of the Caribbean islands or the colorful villages of Spain. Cooking is a popular hobby, and tour companies have developed trips that focus on the cuisine of different regions of the world. Travelers may learn all about how traditional meals are prepared and what ingredients are used. Or, for those who want to improve their abilities in the kitchen, they may actually receive hands-on lessons, acquiring new skills that they can take home with them. Travelers to Britain can enroll in courses at any of the 20-plus adult residential colleges around the country. The courses at these schools generally last just a few days and range in content from activities such as photography and dancing to more serious subjects such as history, philosophy, and literature. These are just a few examples of the many types of learning vacations that people enjoy every year. In addition to gaining knowledge and skills, another advantage of these types of vacations is that they can be more economical than traditional vacations. Camping out near an archaeological site or sleeping in a college dormitory or youth hostel certainly costs less than staying at a luxury hotel or vacation resort. And the fact that many of these trips can be organized by the travelers themselves without the services of a tour company or travel agency makes them even more economical. Of course, it all depends on the type of trip one chooses, and some companies offer learning vacations to exotic locales with expert professionals that are quite costly. With the broad range of possibilities available, there are options to suit all tastes and budgets. What makes a small business successful? The U.S. Small Business Administration defines small businesses as those employing fewer than 500 employees, and many are much smaller than that. In the United States, about a third of small businesses employ fewer than 20 employees. Many thousands of new small businesses are started every year, but few survive. In fact, according to the SBA, 1 in 3 fails during the first 2 years, and only 1 in 2 survives beyond 5 years. People start small businesses for a variety of reasons, but whatever the particular motivation, certain characteristics make a small business more likely to succeed. Business advisors point to the importance of finding a niche. It is difficult for a small business to compete with the array of products or services a large business can offer. Instead, the small business that has defined what is unique about the product or service it provides has a greater chance of success. A small business can offer customers personalized service and specialized products or knowledge that can be more difficult to find in a large chain store, for example. Related to the concept of finding a niche is the importance of maintaining a competitive edge. To be successful, a business has to look at what its competitors, whether large or small, are doing and find a way to stay ahead of the game. In addition to offering a specialized product or service, a business that has more efficient production or distribution systems, a better location, or a reputation for excellence in customer service can do well in a competitive market. Research and planning are vital steps in setting up a small business. It is essential to determine who the potential customers are and the best way to reach them. It is also necessary to develop a sound business plan that, among other things, shows how the business will make a profit and projects the cash flow that will help the business stay afloat. Naturally, a successful small business starts out with proper financial support. In addition to the costs of starting the business, there are also the costs of running it until it starts turning a profit. Typically, a small business takes 1 to 2 years to become profitable. During that time, there are still expenses that have to be met. Rent has to be paid, employees have to be paid their wages, and supplies have to be bought. If plans have not been made for supporting the costs of the business until it brings in a profit, inevitably it will fail. One important tip is to start small. This allows owners the opportunity to learn little by little without making huge, costly mistakes. Working alone in one's basement during the initial phases of the business, for example, costs a great deal less than renting a space and hiring staff. If the business generates less income than expected or if the market needs to be redefined, the financial losses will be much less if expenses have been kept to a minimum. About half of private sector employees in the United States work for small businesses. This number is even greater in other parts of the world. Successful small businesses make important contributions to the economy everywhere. Brand loyalty. From the neighborhood barber to the international conglomerate, most businesses have a common goal: repeat customers. Developing a committed clientele can be more valuable than attracting new customers whose loyalty to a company's products may be fleeting. Brand loyalty is a psychological bond that, once established, is difficult to reverse, and it is more complicated than simply buying the same product time and again. True brand loyalty differs from what some marketing researchers refer to as spurious loyalty, a passive condition in which people consistently buy a brand for reasons such as habit, convenience, price, and availability, but not the result of any true loyalty or passion for the actual merchandise. It is usually not difficult to convince consumers with spurious loyalty to try another brand. Products that create true consumer loyalty tend to be non-essential day-to-day items such as tobacco, beverages, candy, and beauty products, as well as luxury purchases such as designer clothes and cars. Household staples such as milk, eggs, sugar, and paper products create little brand loyalty, with most consumers just as likely to purchase private labels or store brands or whatever is on sale. A product must have acceptable quality to establish true brand loyalty, but even top quality is not enough on its own to forge a strong connection with a consumer. Customers relate to products for emotional and symbolic reasons. People identify with the image associated with a brand, for example, as a result of a celebrity endorsement or because of the social values of the company. In addition, people consistently purchase pricey items because of the perceived status those items confer. Brand-loyal consumers are unlikely to defect to the competition because loyal consumers develop a preference for a product, ignore negative associations, and believe it outperforms others, even when there is little difference among brands. For example, beverage drinkers in blind taste tests regularly fail to select their favorite brand even though they mention taste as the primary reason for their loyalty. Brand loyalty is a worldwide phenomenon, but it is a luxury that prevails where people have more money to spend. In China's burgeoning economy, sales are soaring for certain top-of-the-line luxury cars after concerted efforts were made to promote them. At the same time, European fashion companies are taking advantage of Chinese consumers' thirst for designer labels, selling goods worth billions of US dollars a year. Consumers become less selective about brands in economic downturns. During the recession of the early 21st century, more consumers in Europe and North America turned to brands that cost less instead of the ones they preferred, and more retailers packaged goods under their own private labels. Although private labels are also influencing shoppers in South Africa and Japan, they have had little effect in Hong Kong, where people have more disposable income and therefore remain loyal to the higher-priced brands. Brand loyalty is less prevalent in poorer countries where consumers have fewer choices and price is usually the priority. Global outsourcing. Outsourcing, subcontracting work to another company, has always been a part of doing business. Firms hire other firms to do work they cannot do themselves or can have done more cheaply elsewhere. With today's global economy, the practice is now so prevalent that even companies in the business of outsourcing are outsourcing work to others. Wealthy nations routinely send all types of work to countries where labor costs are cheaper, but currently the most frequently outsourced jobs are in information technology, software, and customer service. Japan, Western European countries, and the United States outsource the most work, and India and China take in the most. Language skills are a decisive factor in where work is sent, with India and the Philippines serving English-speaking clients, Argentina working with Spain, Mexico serving Spanish speakers in the United States, and China handling Asian languages such as Mandarin, Cantonese, and Korean. As a preponderance of corporations conduct business in English, the bulk of outsourcing jobs in recent decades have gone to India, where its status as a former British colony resulted in millions of people speaking English as their first language. About half of India's outsourcing work comes from the United States, with about a quarter from European countries and the remainder from countries such as Japan and Australia. Some of the largest outsourcing firms in the world have headquarters in India. However, confronted with increasing demand, a looming shortage of skilled workers, and rising wages at home as the Indian economy grows, some of those outsourcing companies are now turning to other countries to help meet their own staffing needs. They outsource largely to China but also to dozens of other countries, including the Philippines, Mexico, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, and, in some cases, the country where the work originated. For example, a US-based software company might outsource IT support to a company based in India, which then subcontracts part of the work to a company in the United States. Much of the IT support market is now moving to China, where a vast supply of highly trained people are willing to work for lower wages than people in India. With newer Chinese companies not yet well established in the outsourcing business, Indian firms are opening branches there, where their knowledge of English and well-developed managerial skills give them an advantage, at least for now, in dealing with international clients. Outsourcing has long been a source of controversy, with opponents pointing to the loss of jobs and damage to the economy in the home country, and proponents viewing the savings and labor costs as a boon to business. The receiving countries generally consider the well-paying jobs a benefit to their economy, but employees are not always happy with the work. Staff turnover can be high when employees have to work long night shifts to coincide with the business day in the outsourcing country. India remains the outsourcing epicenter for now, with China slowly catching up, but the situation will continue to change. Once wages rise high enough in India and China, foreign workers somewhere else will be as enticing to outsourcing countries as India and China now are to Europe, Japan, and the United States. What is plogging? Every year, millions of tons of plastic are produced on our planet, and the resulting trash is causing serious damage to the natural environment. Much of this plastic is in the form of items that are considered disposable, things such as bottles, bags, and wrappers that are discarded after being used only once. What happens to these items? Often they end up on the street, either through littering or by falling out of trash cans. Once in the street, bits of trash eventually make their way to storm drains. From there they travel through pipes to streams or rivers and finally to the ocean. In this way, a large percentage of the plastic produced on our planet ends up in the ocean, where it jeopardizes the lives of countless animals. Believe it or not, fitness lovers have found one way to contribute to a solution to this problem: plogging. Plogging is an activity that takes advantage of the popularity of jogging as a form of exercise to help clean up the environment. The original plogging group was started in Sweden, and the word plogging is formed from a combination of the Swedish phrase plocka, meaning pick up, and the word jogging. The idea is simple: joggers pick up any trash they spot while they are out jogging. Plogging began in Sweden as a formalized group of people going out together to pick up trash during their regular jogs. Eventually, information about this activity spread through social media, and the idea began to catch on in different countries. The trend has grown so that now plogging groups can be found on just about every continent. Of course, plogging does not have to be carried out in formalized groups, and the idea of picking up trash while out jogging or walking is not a new one. Nevertheless, the establishment of formalized groups and the special term for the activity seem to have contributed to its popularity. It is always more fun and motivating to carry out an activity in the company of other people. Members of a plogging group equip themselves with protective gloves and trash bags. They enjoy social time together while improving their fitness and beautifying their neighborhood, all at the same time. Plogging has added health benefits as well. According to fitness apps, plogging burns more calories than jogging alone. In addition, plogging involves a lot of bending over and squatting, activities that strengthen different muscles than jogging does. Speaking of apps, plogging has become so popular that numerous apps have been developed especially for this activity. Plogging apps may track users' time, distance, and number of calories burned, as well as connect them with other people in their area who also enjoy plogging. From Sweden to the United States to Venezuela to Singapore to Australia, people around the world have joined the plogging trend. They are improving both their fitness levels and their social lives while doing their bit to help clean up the planet. Why are women leaving science careers? Generations of women struggled for the right to pursue careers in science and technology, yet today nearly half the women scientists in Europe and the Americas leave their careers. The difference in numbers between men and women who advance and persist in their fields cannot be attributed to race, ethnic, or social group. The dire consequences of this loss may become more acute as the number of women entering science careers increases. Since the L990S, more women than men have enrolled in college, earned higher grades, and majored in science or technology fields. If the trend continues and more than half these women leave their careers by their mid-40s, approximately 1/3 of all scientists will leave their careers in the next 20 years. So why are women leaving the science careers they worked so hard to attain? Studies by academic and professional associations show the causes for the loss of this valuable resource are threefold: time, family responsibilities, and lack of role models. High-level jobs in science, in both the corporate and the academic world, require inordinate amounts of time. With increased use of the internet, cell phones, and other electronic forms of communication, scientists are not only required to be in the lab or office 10 to 12 hours a day, but expected to be available the rest of the time, too. Professional time demands are the same for both men and women, but many more women opt out than men because of significant issues that men do not face. Although women are nearing equality in the professional world, the pressures of caring for family still rests largely with women. According to studies, professional women with children still bear the majority of the responsibilities at home. They spend more time with the children and on taking care of the home than men. Biology dictates that women require extended leaves of absence when they are pregnant and give birth, yet to advance in their careers, women cannot afford to take time off until their late 30s, when the optimal time for having healthy babies is ending. Women can devote the necessary attention to neither career nor home life, often creating intense frustration. Discrepancies in opportunities and salaries still exist between the sexes. Because there are fewer female role models in the upper levels of science and technology fields, women have fewer mentors who provide invaluable support. Without mentors, women in the sciences go without the support, guidance, and networking needed to lead them through the complications of corporate culture, to validate their ideas and secure funding for research, and to access those who can help them progress in their careers. Mentors also help scientists develop business expertise. Mentored scientists hold more patents, an important source of wealth. Women hold only 14% of new patents awarded. Without mentors, women have to work harder to reach the same goals as men, and all the while, many women are still paid less than men for commensurate work. To keep women scientists in the workforce, some companies are instituting mentoring programs, on-site child care, flex time, and other innovative accommodations. Unfortunately, many companies are content to outsource or to bring in men from other countries to fill positions that valuable but frustrated women scientists leave behind. Wheelchair accessibility issues. As many as 650 million people worldwide live with some form of physical disability, and about 100 million of the disabled need a wheelchair at least part of the time. Industrialized, higher-income nations in Asia, Europe, and North America are seeing an older population grow more incapacitated as they age, whereas in lower-income countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, poverty, conflict, injuries, and accidents account for most disabilities, many of them in children. Wheelchairs provide a more independent lifestyle, but they come with their own set of problems. They are wide, unwieldy, and difficult to maneuver in tight spaces, on slippery surfaces, and on steep slopes, not to mention impassable stair steps. Accessibility issues abound at home, work, and school, in recreation activities, and in transportation. One of the most difficult places to use a wheelchair is the home. The average doorway width of about 76 centimeters falls some 5 to 15 centimeters short of the space necessary to accommodate a wheelchair. To be accessible to a person in a wheelchair, bathrooms require grab bars and showers and tubs, built-in shower seats, lower sinks and mirrors, and higher toilet seats. Kitchens need lower counters and shelves as well as accessible switches for lights, garbage disposals, and exhaust fans. Also, because most homes have at least a few steps, a wheelchair ramp is a must. Many countries have laws requiring public buildings, workplaces, stores, restaurants, and entertainment and sports facilities to be wheelchair accessible. To accommodate wheelchairs, building exteriors need wide sidewalks with curb cuts and ramps. Automatic doors, including those on elevators, must be broad and remain open long enough for a person in a wheelchair to come and go with ease. In a building interior, corridors must be wide enough for a person in a wheelchair and another person on foot to pass side by side, and carpeting should be firm enough for wheelchairs to roll over easily. Restrooms must be wheelchair accessible, too. Although many countries have made these improvements, many more have yet to follow their example. Transportation needs must also be considered. With appropriate technology, some wheelchair users can drive cars, although getting in and out of a vehicle while in a wheelchair usually necessitates a portable ramp. Many cities have subway and bus systems that accommodate wheelchairs, and the list is growing. For example, Beijing updated its subway system for the 2008 Olympics, providing disabled riders their access to it for the first time. In most developing countries, a major concern is not so much wheelchair accessibility as access to a wheelchair. People may have limited finances and live in places without improved roads and sidewalks. Growing public awareness is contributing to less expensive types of wheelchairs being designed for specific environments, for example, chairs capable of maneuvering across dirt roads and rugged terrain but lightweight and compact so they can fold up to fit in crowded spaces, such as the aisle of a bus. These wheelchairs also must be affordable and constructed of locally available materials for easy repair. The number of people needing a wheelchair is expected to increase by 22% over the next decade, with most of the increase coming in developing countries, where fewer than 1% of those in need now have access to one. Lesson 9, Reading 1, Learning Styles. There are 3 basic types of classroom learning styles: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. These learning styles describe the most common ways that people learn. Individuals tend to instinctively prefer one style over the others. Thus, each person has a learning style that is dominant, even though he or she may also rely somewhat on the other approaches at different times and in different circumstances. Visual learners prefer to sit somewhere in the classroom where no obstructions hinder their view of the lesson. They rely on the teacher's facial expressions and body language to aid their learning. They learn best from a blend of visual displays and presentations such as colorful videos, diagrams, and flip charts. Often, these learners think in pictures and may even close their eyes to visualize or remember something. When they are bored, they look around for something to watch. Many visual learners lack confidence in their auditory memory skills and so may take detailed notes during classroom discussions and lectures. Auditory learners sit where they can hear well. They enjoy listening and talking, so discussions and verbal lectures stimulate them. Listening to what others have to say and then talking the subject through helps them process new information. These learners may be heard reading to themselves out loud because they can absorb written information better in this way. Sounding out spelling words, reciting mathematical theories, or talking their way across a map are examples of the types of activities that improve their understanding. Kinesthetic learners may find it difficult to sit still in a conventional classroom. They need to be physically active and take frequent breaks. When they are bored, they fidget in their seats. They prefer to sit someplace where there is room to move about. They benefit from manipulating materials and learn best when classroom subjects such as math, science, and reading are processed through hands-on experiences. Incorporating arts and crafts activities, building projects, and spans into lessons helps kinesthetic learners process new information. Physical expressions of encouragement, such as a pat on the back, are often appreciated. In addition to these traditional ways of describing learning styles, educators have identified other ways some students prefer to learn. Verbal learners, for example, enjoy using words, both written and spoken. Logical learners are strong in the areas of logic and reasoning. Social learners do best when working in groups, whereas solitary learners prefer to work alone. Research shows that each of these learning styles, as well as the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic styles, uses different parts of the brain. Students may prefer to focus on just one style, but practicing other styles involves more of the brain's potential and therefore helps students remember more of what they learn. Teachers who present their lessons using varied techniques that stimulate all learning styles expose students to both their dominant and less preferred methods of learning, aiding them to more fully reach their potential as learners. The homeschool option. Educating children at home as an alternative to formal education is an option chosen by families in many parts of the world. The homeschooling movement is popular in the United States, where close to 1 million children are educated at home. In Canada, 1% of school-aged children are homeschooled, and the idea also enjoys growing popularity in Australia, where 20,000 families homeschool their children. The movement is not limited to these countries. Homeschooling families can be found all over the world, from Japan to Taiwan to Argentina to South Africa. Homeschooling is not a novel idea. In fact, the idea of sending children to spend most of their day away from home at a formal school is a relatively new custom. In the United States, for example, it was not until the latter part of the 19th century that state governments began making school attendance compulsory. Prior to that, the concept of a formal education was not so widespread. Children learned the skills they would need for adult life at home from tutors or their parents, through formal instruction or by working side by side with the adults of the family. In the modem-developed world, where the vast majority of children attend school, families choose homeschooling for a variety of reasons. For people who live in remote areas, such as the Australian outback or the Alaskan wilderness, homeschooling may be their only option. Children who have exceptional talents in the arts or other areas may be homeschooled so that they have more time to devote to their special interests. Much of the homeschooling movement is made up of families who, for various reasons, are dissatisfied with the schools available to them. They may have a differing educational philosophy, they may be concerned about the safety of the school environment, or they may feel that the local schools cannot adequately address their children's educational needs. The legal environment surrounding homeschooling varies. In some places, a government-approved course of study is mandated, whereas in others, homeschoolers may be required only to follow general guidelines, or even none at all. Sometimes periodic progress reports, tests, or professional evaluations are obligatory. There are different approaches to homeschooling that individual families can take. Some follow a particular educational philosophy, such as the Montessori method or Waldorf education. Others use a mixed approach, borrowing from a variety of methods and materials. A large selection of prepared educational products is available to specifically address the needs of homeschooling families, and correspondence courses can also be purchased. In addition, homeschooling magazines and websites give families the opportunity to read about others' experiences and get ideas for different kinds of educational activities to try. As the homeschooling movement grows around the world, so, too, do the opportunities for homeschooling families to share experiences and ideas at conferences and on the internet. Although most families continue to choose a traditional classroom education for their children, homeschooling as an alternative educational option is becoming more popular. Educating the gifted. What is a gifted child? There are different ways to define this term. It may refer to special talents in the arts or to a high level of academic abilities. A child may be gifted in one specific area, such as music, or have talents in many areas. According to the U.S. National Association for Gifted Children, a gifted child shows an exceptional level of performance in one or more areas. In general usage, giftedness includes high levels of cognitive ability, motivation, inquisitiveness, creativity, and leadership. Gifted children represent approximately 3 to 5% of the school-aged population. Although giftedness cannot be assessed by an intelligence test alone, these tests are often used to indicate giftedness. By and large, giftedness begins at an IQ of 115, or about 1 in 6 children. Highly gifted children have IQs over 145, or about 1 in 1,000 children. Profoundly gifted children have IQs over 180, or about 1 in 1,000,000 children. Because very few education programs include any courses on teaching the gifted, teachers are often not able to recognize the profoundly gifted. Teachers are more likely to recognize moderately gifted children because they are ahead of the other children, but not so far ahead as to be unrecognizable. For instance, children who can read older children's books in first and second grade are often transferred into gifted classes, but children who are reading adult books are told to stop reading them. Those profoundly gifted students who are not recognized often turn into discipline problems when they are not offered constructive ways to focus their extraordinary creativity. The practice of creating a separate, enriched curriculum for gifted students began in the early 20th century. At that time, social scientists noted that gifted children often speak, read, and move at an earlier age than their peers. At a younger age, they are able to work at a higher conceptual level, develop more sophisticated methods to solve problems, and show more creativity in their methods and interpretation of assignments. After the first schools for the gifted were established, these students were followed for many years to see if enriched education made a difference. It did. Gifted students who were grouped together and taught a special curriculum earned 50 times more doctoral degrees than gifted students who were not given an enriched curriculum. When gifted programs have been cut, the parents of the participants have reported decreased inquisitiveness, motivation, and energy levels in their children, and a simultaneous withdrawal from the classroom experience. Identified gifted students who attend schools without any program for the gifted show a steady decrease in motivation and test scores between 1st and 6th grade. There are still very few opportunities for educating the gifted in the lowest socioeconomic levels. The schools that service the poorest areas often dedicate their efforts toward remedial teaching rather than accelerated curriculum, and students with extraordinary talents are often not recognized. About 25% of the world's gifted population are too poor to be noticed. The development of the light bulb. Thomas Edison is generally credited with the invention of the light bulb. In fact, he was just one inventor among many involved in the process of moving the concept of incandescent light from inspiration to marketable reality. What he actually invented in 1879 was a carbon filament that lasted for 40 hours. In 1880, he improved his idea, producing a filament derived from bamboo that burned for 1,200 hours. The first person to successfully produce light with an electric current was Humphrey Davy, who connected a carbon filament to a battery in 1809. Other inventors worked on refinements of this idea. In 1835, James Lindsay unveiled an electric lamp, which cast enough light to read a book 1.5 feet away. In 1854, Henrik Global created the first actual light bulb, a glass bulb containing a filament that glowed when electrical current passed through it. However, it burned out too quickly to have any commercial value. The next critical idea was an invention by the German chemist Hermann Sprengel. This was the Sprengel pump, a device that used mercury to create a vacuum. Reducing the oxygen in the bulb allowed the filament to glow longer before burning out. In 1874, Henry Woodward and Matthew Evans filed a patent for a light specifically described as a shaped piece of carbon held between two electrodes enclosed in a glass vessel. Woodward and Evans attempted to raise the necessary money to improve and market their invention. However, as entrepreneurs, they had little success finding anyone to back them financially. Eventually, they sold the rights to their patents to Thomas Edison. Edison had already been working on the same idea, but for him money was not a critical issue. He was no longer a solitary inventor working in his basement, but the head of a laboratory with the support of investors. He worked to refine the Woodward and Evans light because its filament burned out too quickly. Edison set about testing every material possible for use as a filament. Before I got through, Edison recalled, I tested no fewer than 6,000 vegetable growths and ransacked the world for the most suitable filament material. He even considered using tungsten, which is the material currently used. Eventually, Edison tried a carbonized cotton thread filament clamped to platinum wires. When tested, it lasted 40 hours. In 1880, he received a patent for this invention. By the end of the year, Edison had perfected a 16-watt bulb that lasted for 1,500 hours. At the same time, Sir Joseph Swan was working on similar ideas in England. In 1860, he obtained a patent for a carbon filament incandescent lamp, and in 1878, another for an improved version of his light bulb. He presented it in a public lecture in 1879. In 1882, Swan sued Edison for patent infringement. As part of the settlement, Edison had to take Swan as a partner in his British Electric Works. Also, in 1877 and 1878, William Edward Sawyer and Alban Mann were granted patents for electric lamps. Based on these patents, the U.S. Patent Office ruled in 1883 that Edison's patents were invalid. Edison fought to appeal that ruling, and in 1889, the court determined that his patents were indeed valid. Edison is famous for having said, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." It is an understandable statement coming from someone whose laboratory tested more than 6,000 filament possibilities. Nevertheless, one might also consider the adage history is written by the winners. Edison may not have been the actual inventor of the light bulb, but he was the man who had the genius, the business sense, and the financial backing to invent the first one that was commercially viable. The invention of variable pitch propellers. Until the late 1920s, airplane propellers were made of a single piece of wood attached at the center to the driveshaft of the engine. The tilt of the propeller, that is, how flatly it faced the wind, was fixed, which meant planes flew as if they had only one gear. If the plane had a fine propeller, it traveled the entire time as if in first gear, working well on takeoff and landing but working inefficiently during sustained flight. If the plane had a thick, coarse propeller, it traveled the entire time as if in high gear, working efficiently during sustained flight, but making takeoffs and landings dangerous and prolonged. This inflexibility meant that commercial uses of such aircraft were limited because the planes could not carry heavy loads either safely or efficiently. In 1922, Wallace Rupert Turnbull patented his latest invention, the variable pitch propeller. His propeller in effect gave airplanes gears. The propeller's blades were separate from each other, attached at the drive shaft in the center, and could be moved independently or together to chop the air at different angles. The propellers could be tilted at takeoff and landing to act as if in first gear, chopping less air with each rotation, and could be tilted when cruising to act as if in high gear, chopping more air with each rotation. With this variable pitch propeller, planes could now take off and land more safely and reliably, carry varying weights, and handle greater variations in wind speed and turbulence. Turnbull was born in New Brunswick in eastern Canada in 1876. He studied mechanical engineering at Cornell, then continued his postgraduate studies in Europe, and returned to work at the Edison Labs in New Jersey. In 1902, just 1 year before the Wright brothers made their historic flight, Turnbull went back home, set up his own lab in a barn, and started running his own aviation experiments. To begin, Turnbull needed a wind tunnel. He built a wind tunnel, the first in the world, out of packing materials. In it, he tested different designs for propellers and wings. His research is the basis for many of the successful designs still in use today. Alone in his barn, Turnbull designed and tested his variable pitch propeller. It was tested successfully in flight in Borden, Ontario, on June 6, 1927. Turnbull spent his life experimenting and designing for the new science of aviation in his barn in Rothsay. He sometimes conferred with fellow aviation enthusiast Alexander Graham Bell in Nova Scotia, but for the most part, he worked in isolation. Unlike most engineers, he chose not to work in a university laboratory or in a lab such as Edison's, where he would have been supported by like-minded engineers and physicists. Instead, he spent his adult life in a barn he equipped himself. Depending only on his intelligence, curiosity, and work ethic, he revolutionized flight. He is honored in Canada as a pioneer in aviation and a genius in the study of aerodynamics. The Transatlantic Cable. Laying the Transatlantic Cable was the culmination of the unflagging perseverance of one man leading like-minded men, of disparate technical and scientific advances, and of the need for faster communication. The first attempts at laying the cable in the 1850s, each of which cost an enormous amount of money, failed utterly. Yet as technology and science improved, and the need for faster communication increased, perseverance finally paid off. The man who rallied support and raised money for the transatlantic cable venture was Cyrus Field, a New York businessman who started the New York, Newfoundland, and London Telegraph Company in 1854. For the next 12 years, Field raised money and expectations in North America and England for repeated attempts at laying a cable. Despite catastrophic cable breaks and a formal inquiry when the first cable stopped working within days. The scientific and technological advances began with electricity, the study of which was attracting the greatest minds of the age. Samuel Morse invented a code that made it possible to send information over electric wires, and he made the first successful transmission in 1842. The next year, de Almeida, a Portuguese engineer, announced the use of gutta percha, a rubber-like sap from the gutta tree, as an insulation for wires. Thus, two of the requisites for an underwater cable were met. In the next several years, telegraph cables were laid in Atlantic Canada, across the English Channel and around Europe, and across the United States. In 1857, the company Field founded set out to lay the cable that had taken months and almost $1 million to make. The cable was made of 340,000 miles of copper and iron wire and 3 tons of gutta percha insulation, too much for one ship to carry. The cable was divided between 2 ships, each towed by another, all 4 provided by the British and American navies. After only 255 miles of cable had been laid, the cable stopped transmitting and then snapped, sinking to the depths of the ocean. The second attempt was made in 1858, beginning at the midpoint of the Atlantic, from which each ship lay cable as she sailed to her home shores. Again, the cable inexplicably stopped working. They tried again a month later, beginning again from the middle and sailing in opposite directions. This time, success. Queen Victoria sent a message to President Buchanan, and both countries celebrated. Within hours, however, the signal began failing. To compensate for the fading transmissions, Whitehouse, the American engineer, transmitted messages at higher voltages, eventually burning out the cable. Once a hero, Field was now vilified. Work on the Transatlantic Cable was halted because of the American Civil War. During the war, the telegraph became indispensable, and enthusiasm for a transatlantic cable mounted. In Scotland, William Thomson, who would later be knighted Lord Kelvin for his work, corrected the design flaws in Whitehouse's cable. Kelvin also designed a mirror galvanometer that could detect weak currents, thus allowing lower voltages and weaker currents to transmit information. In 1866, the world's largest steamship laid Kelvin's new cable, an unqualified success. Field's perseverance had triumphed in the end.